Welcome to Political Fictions, a podcast that had an amazing plan to become party leader, if only we hadn't kept such meticulous paperwork. My name's Cory, and accidentally on purpose leaking information to the press about my rivals is Mark Pack. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Cory.
And this week we are returning to Scandinavian political dramas with the 2004 thriller King's Game. Give us a second to adjust our lighting to be a tad more moody, and then we'll kick off. Excitingly, Mark, this is the first thing we've talked about on the podcast that I hadn't seen before
Aha!
recording it. So this was definitely your pick. Why this one?
So I watched it just over a decade ago, and I remembered how brilliant I thought the sequence over the closing credits was, which I will come on to say a little bit more about, doubtless, when we work our way through the latter categories. I then slightly embarrassingly forgot the name of the film and have had several abortive attempts to rediscover it since, so I could suggest that we watched it on the podcast. And I can confirm that it isn't the very good film called Candidaten, which I was so sure it would be. It's also, I think, another lovely example of this sort of Nordic noir's political sibling, which I guess we could call Nordic ballot box, where people will recognise, I think, quite a few of the actors, especially from Borgen, but a whole host of other things like The Killing and so on. And it's a great film.
Given our occasional habit of almost accidentally watching things with the same name, this isn't the animated series in which lots of school children get a text asking them to complete various tasks, because that does sound like it could be a certain kind of political fiction, but it's definitely not a moody Scandinavian noir. I would recommend watching the film. We're going to try not to spoil the film, but if you want to go in cold, hit pause. You can rent it on Amazon for an inexpensive amount of money. It's about an hour and three quarters, so it's doable in the evening.
Or you can get it on DVD, and the extras, some of the extras are very good. Some of them I thought
Ooh.
were rather tedious, but definitely worth. I guess we should explain for our younger listeners, when we used to get TV and video through DVDs, there often were just quite a smattering of other extras, like deleted scenes and the like, which are quite fun to watch. And some of the extras I would definitely recommend for this one as well.
Enough plot that isn't a spoiler, enough to get you anchored. This takes place a couple of weeks before the general election in Denmark, and the Centre Party, so not the moderate party like in Borgen, Centre Party is doing very well in the polls. It's expected, I think, to form the next government. And their leader is Axel Brun, and he's involved in a car crash and is hospitalised. So essentially, how the film plays out is it's following the battle of the Centre Party to work out should they replace their candidate for States Minister, Prime Minister, with either Erik Dreyer, who's the establishment choice, or Lone Kjeldsen. Apologies to our Danish listeners. She's female, I guess a bit like Borgen. This is before there's been a female prime minister, and she's a sort of more radical choice. As part of this leadership contest, there's a journalist, Ulrich Torp, and he finds out about a scandal related to alleged financial mismanagement around Kjeldsen's husband. And so the film essentially is how does that leadership battle play out in the final days of the election campaign, as well as Torp's attempts to get to the truth.
And there is also a moody, devious spin doctor called Peter, ironically enough, Peter Shue, who perhaps for most people who watch it from Britain will be the most recognisable character, because the actor Lars Mikkelsen has appeared in The Killing and Borgen, both of which have been very popular in the UK. He's also one of the stars of Flame and Citron, slightly more niche, but was reputedly the most expensive Danish movie of all time when it was made. It's a Second World War based movie, which is great in terms of the moral dilemmas about armed resistance. I think it's a really powerful movie. He also, perhaps more commercially successfully, but with less moral heft to it, has appeared in various Star Wars spin-offs, and I think also appears in the BBC remake of Sherlock Holmes, the modern version of Sherlock Holmes. So he's very, very familiar. And he also has a brother who is an actor who looks like a slightly older, overweight version of him, like what he will turn into if he lets himself go a bit, who plays Le Chiffre in Casino Royale.
That's an acting dynasty.
Indeed, I mean it's a very impressive track record. One could fill a large part of your year simply enjoying watching things that he's appeared in.
Next item on the agenda, this is part of then All the President's Men, cast and crew. So yeah, Lars Mikkelsen, he was also in Guillermo del Toro's recent Frankenstein film as Captain
What does
Anderson,
it say about us that that's the
apparently.
thing you picked while I picked the obscure Star Wars spin-offs?
I probably was using IMDb
And
and
I was using a different online source.
top of the list for IMDb. Far be it from me to correct anyone's Danish pronunciation, Mark. I think it's Peter Scow, not Peter Shoe, although it's spelt Shoe. But I feel like they're saying
Quite
Scow in the
possibly.
film. But
Quite
I
possibly.
realise I don't think we want to go in the rabbit hole of correcting people's foreign pronunciations.
No, I think let's steer clear. Let's steer
Um,
clear of that.
And in terms of the other cast and crew, so yeah, as you say, it's very much Scandi drama ballot box bingo, isn't it? So we've done a Borgen, and there's a couple of actors in that pop up here. Huxenhaven, who is part of the ruling coalition, he's a social democrat. I think was nominated but didn't win the Phil Willis Award in that Borgen episode. He pops up as the husband
Mm.
for whom the mismanagement we sort of mentioned. And there's also Bjorn Henriksen plays Bo Anderson, who's a TV interviewer,
Oh yes, of course.
who I think
Yeah,
was also,
yeah. He's in Morgan, isn't he?
yeah, I think he's a fellow social democrat.
There is one thing that confuses me about the cast because I saw from my notes that I wrote in 2015 after having watched it that I said, "quote." It has that distinctive Scandinavian touch of thoughtful, low key, and gradually building tension. In Hollywood's hands, we would have had improbably handsome actors rushing about at high speed to a thumping music soundtrack. But watching it this time, I thought actually several of the actors are improbably handsome. The senior management in the newspaper, I think, do look much richer, better hairstyles, smarter suits, had an easier life than I would imagine. So I don't know what has changed in my attitudes in
Uh,
the intervening years.
I mean, when we talked about doing this podcast, first of all, you were thinking about how would your reflection on these kind of political dramas change with the passing of time?
Mm.
You know, now that I guess 10 years
Yeah,
have passed and you've served your party in high office. You know, you're sitting in Parliament deciding on laws, and your reflections are mainly on the
completely
hairstyles
trivial.
of
Completely
the
trivial.
press. Other thing we should say is it's based on the novel
Oh, yes, of course.
by, and this is where you get the chance to correct my Danish pronunciation. I'm going to go with Niels Krauss-Kjær.
I'll go with that.
All
I'll
right.
go with that.
There's a lot of talk in this, not in the film, about the revolving door of politics in the media,
Mm.
and he's definitely part of a revolving door of something because he was a spin doctor for the Conservative Party in Denmark, and it sounds like while he was working for the Conservative Party in Denmark, they had a couple of changes of leadership,
Mm.
which probably influenced the political skullduggery that we watch in the film.
And I think he has a brief cameo in the film. I only saw that referred to briefly by one person. I don't know what he looks like, so I wasn't able to verify that. But I think he does have a brief cameo.
If listeners, if you know if he's improbably handsome or indeed improbably ugly, then do let us know if you spotted him. Art of the possible, next section.
Mm.
Are there any similarities between this film and real events? So I suppose a lot of the plot is driven by the actions of a politician's spouse. There's a few parallels to that in Britain. So
Mm.
there was a relatively big media storm
Mm.
when Tony Blair was Prime Minister
Mm.
about Sherry Blair's relationship with Carol Kaplan,
Mm.
which during the expenses scandal, I think
Mm.
Jackie Smith and her husband, I think, claimed on
Mm.
expenses for an adult film, which was just very horribly embarrassing to
Mm.
everyone. And then more recently, I was thinking about Rishi Sunak and his wife and her
Yeah,
tax
absolutely.
arrangements is probably the main examples.
And I think also that there was a widespread speculation when the film came out in Denmark about which character is based on which politician, which I think that the people who made the film got a little bit irritated by, partly because I think a lot of the assumptions that people made were wrong. And
Yeah.
as you say, based on a novel by somebody who had worked briefly for the Conservative Party, and that clearly informed some of the film. And also, the film came out relatively soon after there had been a docudrama about Anders Fogh Rasmussen, so genuine Danish politician who was a key mover and shaker in European policy at the time that other countries were being admitted to the European Union. And so it was a docudrama that, if you look at the cast list for it, includes people like Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac also appearing in it, but also was the first of those sorts of docudramas in Denmark, really. And it was called Fog Behind the Facade. So that idea of being revealing what politicians really get up to when they're having all of these high powered meetings. So this was in some way a natural sibling to that of you've had the docudrama and now you've got the fictionalized version. And I think you can certainly see some parallels between that genuine Danish politician's career and the film, because that also involves a scandal which someone has to resign over, but then has not necessarily the consequences one would fully expect. I can leave it cryptically hanging in the air like that, not to give away too many spoilers.
That was some good lack of spoiler detail, I think. Yeah,
One thing I
and
do wonder though is I don't know if you noticed in the film, there at one point is a reference to when they're discussing how to handle an issue, a scandal involving a politician and a phone call that had taken place years previously. And I wondered if that was a genuine callback to something that happened in Danish politics. But the only Danish telephone call related scandals I could find have happened after the film was released.
so actually maybe this film inspired a whole host of
Maybe, yeah.
Danish-based phone call melodrama.
There's something about that line that makes you think, or at least made me think, oh, I meant to know what this is a reference to. I like the little touch about politicians hiding the fact that they smoke, which is a very real thing in British politics. That we've come a long way from, Harold Wilson, deliberately using his pipe as a political prop. And I think more politicians smoke than the public would expect if you were to ask them, because it's now just the normal thing to be rather discreet, shall we say, and not deliberately covering it up, but rather discreet.
Sorry, and during election campaigns as well, I think it's one of those where I suppose the extra sort of stress and the fact that you're away a lot. I get the impression, especially if you're sort of away from your
Yeah.
spouse, it's easy to. I don't know what the smoking equivalent is of falling off the wagon. The leader of the
Listeners, what
party.
people can't see is that Cory's wife left his home just before we started recording, and now he's puffing away like mad, puffing away like
Absolutely,
mad,
cosplaying Harold Wilson, like David
as you do,
Cameron.
as you do most weekends.
Absolutely, but not in a let's just call a referendum on Europe because what could possibly go wrong kind of way. It's the wrong way of cosplaying Harold Wilson. So the leader of the Centre Party doesn't die in this car crash, but a lot of the fact that there's speculation in the midst after a terrible tragedy where you're sort of navigating the fact that there's loads of grief-stricken colleagues and friends, whilst also the show's got to go on. Certainly from a Labour point of view, reminds me of both the death of Hugh Gateskill, but also the death of John Smith. And they're
And
not.
indeed, Harold Macmillan as well. In some ways, maybe almost a better parallel because of all of the political shenanigans around who would succeed him. They seem to fit quite well.
His resignation. Oh yeah, because I guess Macmillan resigns pretty quickly, doesn't he, because of ill health? Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say yeah. So I thought you meant his death in the 80s, and I thought I don't remember.
Yeah.
Don't remember that triggering a succession crisis.
Generally, the whole feel of the film about leadership candidates jostling with each other before there's a formal leadership contest, smear stories being planted in the press that don't always stand up. It just has a real sense of veracity about it.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me it's written by a spin doctor. It feels pretty authentic, doesn't it? There's a lot of reference, and we'll talk, I imagine, a bit later about that sort of revolving door between journalism, parliament, business, all that sort of spin doctors, all that sort of thing. We're recording not too long after the Gortland Denton by-election. Hannah Spencer won that first Green by-election victory. She's just written a piece for The Guardian in which essentially her critique of Parliament is pretty similar to a lot of the critiques from there's a kind of crusading journalist, isn't there, who isn't part of the political set, and you know that because he's kind of unshaven, a bit slovenly. Steve Bannon vibes, probably not quite the vibes he meant that the film wants him to give off, but that's definitely the look. But again, the critiques are quite similar, aren't they? It's this idea that you've got politicians who are sort of removed from everyday concerns.
Yeah, and there is the nepo baby thing about the journalist at the heart of the story, a gig because of what their father had done in politics previously.
Absolutely, it wouldn't happen in Britain.
No, absolutely not.
The fact that Dad talks about missing the game, I think this is something when you talk with politicians, people who are sort of involved, who are sort of umming and ahhing about whether they carry on. I think the thing that often drives them is quite liking the the sort of the machinations and the drama. And I mean, if I'm honest, Mark, I hate it. Like, play Battlestar Galactica or play some blitz chess if you want to, you know, get your adrenaline
I
going.
love the idea that perhaps the way to improve British politics and get a better quality of politician is to sort of distract them by sending them box sets of Battlestar Galactica to hope that they will watch that rather than spending lots of time. Maybe
Or
this is how, at the time of recording, Keir Starmer is still currently Labour Party leader and Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Maybe the way for Keir Starmer to prop up his leadership over the summer to send box sets of Battlestar Galactica to
what
every Labour backbench MP to distract them from plotting.
I was thinking of the board game because if you want a board game in which you're kind of acting as a secret traitor, but you don't want other people to know, Battlestar Galactica is a very
But don't you
good
need to
way.
get people together to play the board game? Might not that result in MPs talking to each other and
And
plotting?
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
DVD safely watched on your own at home.
This is why I'm not in the number 10 operation, Mark, because I've just caused a top
It would
secret
have been, yeah.
cabal too. Most improbable thing, I think, is the fact that, again, the journalists end up getting into locations they really shouldn't have access to. So there are crucial scenes in which they somehow manage to inveigle themselves into a college, and they also inveigle themselves into a TV studio without ever being stopped. And unless security in Denmark is much more lax than it should be,
So it's interesting. That didn't strike me as being particularly improbable. Maybe that's because part of my expectation of how journalists behave has come from reading autobiographies, for example, of by British journalists, where they were growing up in an era where a lot of dodgy activity was quite normal. Obviously, we had the huge phone hacking scandal and all of that. But for example, Andrew Marr, in his memoirs, talks about how when he was learning to be a journalist, one of the sort of slightly dodgy, but everyone did it and had a good laugh about it, tricks was if a group of journalists were all trying to chase down a story in some out of place area, and if you were first to the story and you rushed to the found the local public phone box to ring the story in, occasionally the slightly shadier journalists would then snip the cable on the handset in the phone box so that their rivals couldn't get their story into the paper that day. And just the very fact that he tells the story, it not in a embarrassing, this isn't it awful how we used to, he, as if that was just
yeah.
so. And maybe, to be fair to journalists, that sort of perception of mine is a good few decades out of date. But it did strike me that achieving the sorts of things the journalists do in this movie is the sort of thing that a sort of sharp elbow tabloid journalist in the UK probably would do now and again.
I suppose, yeah, just thinking back to All the President's Men, you think it's the kind of thing that Woodward and Bernstein, Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman would have been able to blag their way in. Possibly, yeah. So maybe in a TV studio, I think into a college, into a place of education. I know safeguarding quite wasn't what it was 20 years ago, but I have questions anyway. So next item on the agenda, Phil Willis Award. Regular listeners will probably not be surprised to see that we differ, and probably also not surprised to hear that we differ in pretty usual ways. So I've gone with the boring, solid,
Conventional,
conventional
boring,
wisdom
and
pick.
wrong option.
Anyone who's heard me ever make a political prediction, Mark, will know that's
Would it
entirely
be
within my
too mean of
wheelhouse.
me to say that you go for the Keir Starmer prediction?
Although hopefully I don't alienate the entire listenership with my prediction. I'm hoping there's at least a logic in it. But I mean, you could go for the Spin Doctor, but it's probably drier. Mostly because he's quite entitled. He's quite rude to the journalist. There's a scene in which he's being interviewed by Trop and basically says, you're in my place. You should be more respectful to me in this parliament. Having said that, I suppose his leadership rival says he's no worse than any of the other power hungry people. So the mitigation maybe is that, again, we'll talk about this in a second, but the film doesn't want you to see him as a uniquely bad character. He's more the product of a rotten system.
Yeah, I mean, I think the moody lighting you often get with Dreyer, you're definitely meant to see him as not being an angel. But as you say, I think the message of the film in that respect is he is one of a multiple cast of people who are not angels. But
Whereas, Mark has gone. Those of you who've listened to our Thick of It episode and will remember that Mark's Phil Willis Award to Terry Coverley as the secret genius running British politics will be unsurprised to hear that Mark's gone for an outlandish female character. essentially in a bid to stir up controversy, I have to
Well,
say.
I think it is just very straightforwardly clear and obvious because the clear Machiavellian genius with a touch of evil in this film is Trop's young and photogenic daughter. Because do not be deceived by her cute appearance. Because if you think about the scene where there's her and a young boy playing next to a tree outside a house, and they're playing, and then you cut away from them, and just in the corner of the screen, you see the boy fall violently to the ground. How do you think that happened? I ask you. How do you think that
Boys have
happened?
never fallen off swings without the intervention of evil children ever.
Yeah.
That's for
And
true.
not only is there the mysterious violent fall of the boy, there is her tantrum to secure a new music CD. And there is all the money she gets given by her grandfather. What do you think she told or threatened her grandfather with in order to get that money? I think the evidence is clear
Well,
as to the
absolutely.
true Machiavellian genius of this film.
Grandparents never give their grandchildren any money unsolicited for any other reason other than to commit evil, right? That's what
Absolutely.
we know about grandparents.
Absolutely.
I think the counterpoint to that is anyone who sticks green beans up their nose probably isn't evil, or well, no, or not even Machiavellian.
Excuse me, what is more Machiavellian than trying to manipulate your father than by sticking vegetables up your
Well,
nose?
she was trying to get his attention, and it didn't work because he didn't notice.
It is a weird little scene. I mean, I do like the scene because it gives you a sense of the real family background behind some of the characters.
Hmm.
But the rest of the film doesn't really do that very much at all. It feels a slightly odd scene, the sort of thing that you might watch and then think, hang on a minute, we'll cut that one. It doesn't quite work. But what do I know? I've not made a hugely successful movie.
I wonder if they told her to do that, or if that was improvised and they kept it in. I'm not sure. I mean,
Or
presumably,
maybe the actor who plays the role was just genuinely bored and she was trying to get attention at the time.
maybe it's her bit. Like every film, I have to stick something. I have to stick some vegetable on my nose. And obviously, if they do a sequel, it'll be her in 20 years' time. If your theory's right, it'll be her in 20 years' time, sort of carrying on her grandfather's legacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
okay, so well, listeners, you'll have to uh, watch the film and let us know who you think should win that Full Willis Award because we're going nowhere fast deciding it. Next item though is Barack Obama's tan suit.
Mm.
Best and worst bits of political detail. We've mentioned smoking, but it's interesting. I was surprised given how relatively recent this is, just how much smoking there is. And
There
again,
is a mention of opinion polls. So, of course, that caught my eyes and ears and made me hit the pause button and the rewind to watch multiple times. I thought it's actually quite a convincing and genuine reference to opinion polls because, by its very nature, a lot of things when they feature in drama have to be sort of dumbed down and simplified. But in this case, the use and reference to polling in politics is often quite dumbed down and simplified. So the way there is a poll of party members presented to senior politicians to try to sway their views, and none of them ask any sensible follow-up questions about sample size or leading questions or anything like that, actually is depressingly close to real life.
so can you explain to me that weird pie chart where they have that pie chart of 53-47?
No, I can't.
Because
Other than it
no,
reinforces my strongly held purist Lib Dem belief that bar charts are better than pie charts. But yeah, I cannot explain it.
we can't possibly have a pie chart derailment at this point. But no, because again, well, I can't say I know a huge amount about Danish politics other than it's a multi-party system.
Mm.
And as far as I can tell, it's meant to be the representation of a poll. I think
Mm.
a party, but I don't get the impression it's about the candidates for
Mm.
centre party leader. And I think a red 53, blue
Yeah.
47, maybe the other way around. And it just makes no sense to me.
Particularly where the exact coalition makeup of in a multi-party democracy is not, firmly entrenched. There obviously are some occasions. You get this in Italy, don't you, in particular, where you have very multi-party politics, but very often you have two quite well-established rival camps, and so you can, in a way, talk about the overall polling for the left and the right.
Hmm.
But it's just a bit of graphic design where the graphic designer wasn't really given a brief to explain what they were meant to be doing for that on-screen graphic.
Well, I'm glad that didn't make sense anyway. As someone whose both first name and last name is almost always misspelt
Mm.
in every context. I did love the fact that Torp's name is spelt on his press card as Trop. And speaking of paperwork, the fact that the spin doctor Scow Shu has notes on
Mm.
politicians and their children of sort of there's a scene in which he's talking to a politician and talking about your son, his son's 15, how's his need, and you get injured at football.
Yeah, and that's the sort of classic notes for fundraising calls to large donors, having the personal details ready to slip in as if you remember them. That scene where politicians and journalists are all together in the same big open plan room, and the journalists congregate around the powerful people that you want to talk to. And in this case, they congregate around Peter. Now, perish the
Hmm.
thought there have ever been occasions where lots of journalists have, like a beehive, made their way
Not in Britain.
towards somebody called Peter to get the latest gossip and the latest stories passed to them. But I thought just the physical dynamics of that played out in quite a convincing way. That again,
Hmm.
without wanting to give too much detail to avoid any spoilers, but the way that a scandal hit politician ends up being appointed an EU commissioner in the hope that will help rehabilitate their political career. No parallels in British politics, just to be completely clear.
Completely. Those of you who listened to the Thick of It episode, where there was also a walk-on reference to Peter Mandelson, will remember we talked about access to the Prime Minister. And
Mm.
even in this, there's access to the leader in hospital. That is morbid detail, really.
Although I suspect it wasn't a deliberate reference back to Harold Macmillan, actually that question of who got to speak to Harold Macmillan at those key moments when he was very ill and deciding who to recommend who should be his successor, that
Hmm.
was a real part of that political sequence, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
And the final thing, which again, it's sort of possibly zeitgeist take, but again, if you listen to our episode on Borgen, you'll know we talked about the fact that interviews on Danish television always seem
Mm.
to happen standing up. And there are standing up interviews in this, but there's a crucial denouement interview
Mm.
which takes place sitting down, controversially. So
Exactly.
any fans of Danish interview, sit down interviews will enjoy
Exactly
this
like this
film.
movie.
Next item on the agenda, a very British coup. Are there conspiracy theories in this film? Yes, there are. So this is quite exciting because this is probably, I reckon, maybe the first proper conspiracy
Mm.
thriller we've watched. I mean,
Mm.
I know
Yeah.
kind of All the President's Men is this is very much about that kind of cozy relationship between politicians and journalists. The sort of the fact that questions are sort of agreed on and topics are agreed on or vetoed before interviews. A bit like again, Borg and All the President's Men in the Way. There's kind of part of conversations that Torp has
Mm.
in the editor's office, in which the editor tells him, "It's not your job to fight for justice. You'll get no stories out there in the cold."
I mean, there's obviously the main conspiracy about the plotting to become prime minister. As you say, there's also this more general conspiratorial backdrop about a sort of political and media elite. There's also a little throwaway bit which has aged extremely well when the journalist's daughter asks him, so this is, the real evil mastermind of the film, asks to get a phone. She wants to get her own phone. He does a riff about how phone companies are trying to snare and addict young children, and the way they protect their backs is by making big political donations to keep regulators at bay. That feels like very, very, very relevant to sort of current politics. Delete phone, insert social media company, and you can imagine exactly the same exchange between a parent and their child in a drama that came out next week.
That's kind of part of the journalist's journey, I suppose, as well, isn't it? From being the son of the politician who, as you say, is a bit of a Nepo baby and kind of basically seems to have got the job in Parliament because of his dad,
Mm.
and his journey into going into him with a radical journalist, doesn't it?
The other thing
But
I think that is, you may think is improbable, but I thought was quite a nice touch was the way one of the core strands of conspiratorial behavior involved in the plotting about who will succeed, end up being prime minister, involves some really basic administrative incompetence that leaves an obvious paper trail.
yes,
On the one hand, that is just absurd and unbelievable. If you're doing all of this clever plotting, why would you make such a series of stupid mistakes? On the other hand, look at conspiracies, or at least the conspiracies that have come to light, such basic incompetence often seems to feature in them. The classic example being the bungling of the burglars of the Watergate Centre and everything that flowed from that. I thought it was actually quite believable that you would have dastardly conspiracy undone by a failure to think about the administrative aspects of it.
I suppose the thing that really annoys me about that is the fact that there's the paperwork, but then the fact that having gotten the paperwork in the crucial scene, they then don't close the door of the filing cabinet, therefore alerting the baddie. And you just think, this is ludicrous. I've not stolen any or pilfered any papers from an office I shouldn't have done. But I would like to think if I did do that, I would shut the drawer. I wouldn't leave it open to be, oh, look, what could possibly have happened here? Has my cat been in here again? This is all happening 2 weeks before an election. Like, this is an insane time to make your move to become prime minister. Absolutely incredible. But I think the most improbable bit, the thing that made me really a little bit frustrated, I suppose, is again the sort of journalist basically compares Denmark to, in its lack of consensus, to Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany, and you do think, oh, mate, really?
Yeah, but people do go over the top in that sort of way. So,
Oh yes, but
yes, can I introduce you to comment threads on the internet?
it's one thing because on one hand the film feels like it's trying to be a quite serious political
Mm,
thriller, and it's quite moody.
yeah.
But on the other hand, if there's one country in 2005 which is least like Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany,
Mm,
it's probably Denmark.
mm.
Yeah, and you're right. People say those things, but it doesn't mean I have to take them seriously.
Indeed not.
How to win an election, best and worst bits of political strategy. If I can kick off with this one,
Mm.
the need for proper internal party rules.
Here, absolutely.
If the Centre Party had had proper, clear rules and procedures and clear lines of succession, none of this would have needed to happen. There wouldn't have needed to be a massive conspiracy. You wouldn't have needed to have dastardly people fighting for the Phil Willis Award with random 6-year-old girls.
I quite like as well about some of the political lessons from this film is there political lessons that don't necessarily work, but are things that people try. So at one point, one of the characters says, if we get the MPs, we get the party too. And so the idea that the way you install your favourite person as leader is by getting solid backing from the MPs, and then the party's members will fall in line, which is definitely a plausible theory often, but can go spectacularly wrong. Again, take the example of plotting against Jeremy Corbyn, in the Labour Party. So, and likewise, I like the sheer cynicism, but again with a touch of veracity about it, of the point at which one of the characters says, "I gave him a bypass road for his vote," and that very sort of constituency focused pork barreling, which obviously does go on. I thought the other thing that it brings out nicely, coming back to your point about have a clear rule book, is how important it is to get the timing right for a leadership bid.
Mm.
And the timing has to be driven both by party procedure and by politics and by the outside world. And trying to get the right timing is a matter of juggling all three of those factors. I think also, though, there is a point that you spotted, isn't there? Not only about rules and procedures, but how to chair meetings.
God, so I mean, it's a hard meeting to chair, to be fair, because the Centre Party MPs obviously come together for this first meeting since the leader's been involved in the car crash, and but they've been through the ringer. But the chair of the meeting, and actually given again another reference of Danish people standing up while speaking in the meeting when it's just 12 of you around a circle, which seems very strange. The chair of the meeting stands up and says, "We have an agenda, but I'm not sure where to begin." Which is honestly, if I'd have been in that meeting, my heart would have sunk. Maybe try item one.
Yeah.
Or if you want to say,
before we get to item one, we
yeah,
have one
there's
other
been
thing
this
to say.
terrible tragedy. This is very sad. However, we have an agenda and we've got 50 minutes. That was, yeah, not good. There's a lot of media management in this, which we can't really talk about because of spoilers, really.
But there is that quote about drown out bad news with bigger news, which is absolutely at the sort of heart of a lot of media management ideas. Damien McBride's memoirs, which obviously are maybe slightly self-aggrandizing, but the story that he tells of his life as a Labour spin doctor is absolutely always have a better story in your back pocket so that you can try to head off a journalist or drown out an unwelcome story, but having a bigger story that you can give them.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff about the dark arts, which again makes sense actually. The
Mm.
fact it's a novel by a spin doctor, that a lot of
Yeah.
that feels, there's an interesting bag of tricks here. If you want to try and install your preferred leadership candidate 2 weeks before an election, use this as a place to start. Oh, yeah. So the final one is the leader of the Centre Party, and they're showing footage of him from the previous election. And the spin doctor quote is, "His evil stare cost us the last election." And there was this idea, if he was presented with criticism, he couldn't kind of laugh it off. He would kind of have a bit of a look. And I suppose it's that being able to laugh at criticism. I mean, this is what Nigel Farage is doing at PMQs all the time, isn't it? If Keir Starmer kind of replying with his, I imagine, incredibly spontaneous and not actually as scripted at all response about attack line on reform, that Nigel Farage is basically there, obviously guffawing in a very pantomime-ish way, isn't he? And I suppose, certainly, I guess the lesson that Nigel Farage seems to have taken is you need to show that you are happy to laugh at yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next item, zeitgeist tape. So production details.
I've got a door to mention. But
Oh
do you
yeah,
want to do the more mainstream answers before we do the door?
No, I think we have to go to the door first.
So, in the good tradition of the podcast, I have a door to talk about. In this case, it's the door to one of the toilet cubicles, which has got a gap in the side of it. I don't know if you noticed this. It's really weird. So you've got this cubicle that's sort of sticking out into the main sort of space of the toilets. One character waiting for another character to come out from the cubicle. And so you've got the camera focused on the cubicle door, and you can see there's a gap in the side of the door through which you can see into the cubicle. It's really weird. I've got no idea. Why would you want a gap in the door there? Why would the wall not come all the way?
It's literally the worst place to have a gap in the door.
It's really strange.
I don't think I noticed, probably because I wasn't. It's going to sound
Any
like
listeners are regular frequenters of public toilets in Denmark. If you could let us know whether or not such gaps in cubicles are a normal thing, I'd be intrigued to find out.
We're going to have to do a fact-finding trip to Denmark, aren't we? To
Absolutely. We need to start up a Patreon account so we can do a fundraiser to do a fact-finding trip.
We need to find out gaps in doors and what was that phone scandal all about. Speaking of phones, journalists calling politicians on landline phones. Whereas I
feels
guess
very dated, doesn't
now
it?
they would WhatsApp. I suppose I found it a bit more of a stretch than you did, that the journalists somehow inveigled themselves into the TV studio. I think what's even more strange is that having got into the TV studio to do whatever they had to do, they were then just left in the corridor and weren't escorted out and just left. I think that's the kind of weird bit. While they're waiting for essentially the crucial denouement interview to play out, they're just in the corridor. Yeah, so there's a point my wife made watching it actually, is that now they would be watching the interview on their phones. And actually there's a bit more tension because you can't see it. So there's a couple of, as well as that, the actual leadership election itself, because of the fact that the participants in that election don't seem to have been there to take part in it, which is a bit odd. But the leadership election and that final interview both happen off screen, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I presume a deliberate choice about that sort of sense of big things in politics happening away from the public, away from even the journalists, that it's a sort of artistic choice. One other production detail I liked was, as is often the case for these sorts of dramas, they weren't able to use the actual Parliament building for interiors, but they used Copenhagen Town Hall. So to my non-Danish eyes, I don't know how it looked to you, but it looked a really plausible set of interiors when it was meant to be the inside of Parliament. And I think that worked really nicely, didn't it?
It did.
I think the best moment is one that you only get if you get the DVD, because the copyright screen on the DVD is very spooky. Because what you get, as with, DVDs of this sort of vintage, what you get at the beginning, copyright notice that you can't fast forward through, whatever. So you've got the copyright text on screen and then a little bit of graphics around it with one of the characters in the film sort of moodily looking down. And after a few seconds, he looks up and turns his eyes towards you as if to say, are you actually reading this copyright? It's because, you expect it to be a static image. It normally is. So that was closest I will get to watching a horror movie was the, He's looked at me. His eyes have moved.
It's quite a moody film, isn't it? There is apparently no sunshine. Everything's in shadow.
The colours are
Very
all
dull.
washed out, aren't they? I'm sure there's some clever technical stuff that more knowledgeable people could talk about, but it
Just assume it's
basically looks all
Scandinavia.
washed out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The other little detail that I liked, because I think it's such a cliche of particularly American sort of cop shows and the like from the 1970s, is at one point the two journalists are sort of talking to each other. They've each just got they're at a petrol station. They've each just got a takeaway tea or coffee. They put their mugs on the roof of the car, and then suddenly they have to get in the car and drive off quickly. And one of them leaves their cup on the roof. And that is such a cliched. And so I don't know if it was a little bit of an in joke, but it did make me smile. I was like, hang on a minute, he's forgotten his tea.
Yeah, that's true. Because again, we've sort of alluded to that all through the episode. But yeah, that becomes a bit of a kind of mismatched buddy cop movie subplot, doesn't it?
It does make me wish I could have tracked down the televised version of the film, because after the film's success, it was turned into a 3-part TV miniseries, which is longer than the film. Normally, what you have, obviously, is that if something's been a success in the cinema and the film might get shown on TV, you tend to get some bits might be chopped out. But actually, the TV version is much longer and has got some extra scenes in it and so on. And a few of these things, like that slightly developing buddy relationship between the two journalists, I suspect you see further developed in those extra scenes.
It's like State of Play in Reverse, that was a 3-part series that became a film. Final item on the agenda, State of Play. Would you recommend this film, Mark?
Yeah, I think I enjoyed watching it. I was relieved that it turned out to be the film I thought it was. I really like the closing credits, which we should come back to talk about a little bit more at this point. Picking my words carefully to try not to give away any spoilers. If you just see people get in a car and drive off and the credits begin to roll, and at that point go dash to the toilet or go to put the kettle on, whatever, you miss a set of voiceovers through the credits, which are clips of media reportage from the years subsequent to the events in the film. And in a way that is both seems perfectly natural and plausible and sort of true to the spirit of what you've just watched, it also ends up completely reframing the sort of emotional impacts of what you've just seen. It's a really, normally I don't like twists right at the end because they feel like they're a bit of a cheat, but this is actually a twist that reflects how reality often plays out. So it has really good. So I really like the way it ends. That is a big plus point for it. On the downside, although it's taking place, shortly before polling day, the bulk of the action, I don't feel any real sense of that pressure of the ticking clock of time passing, and you've got to do this before polling. Yeah. Although there's a little bit of mention of that, but it feels like it's all a bit more relaxed. It could be happening over a sort of August holiday season rather than.
That's a really good point, because I suppose the reason they have it before polling day is because it means they can't wait to see what happens.
So that sets up the reason why people start plotting, but then the plotting all happens it feels like too sedate a place. So I think in the end, where I come down on this is I'm more likely to rewatch it than either Election or The Iron Lady, so 2 other films we've done on this podcast. But I'm not bursting to try to track down the sequel, which came out in 2024. Really like the way that closing twist is structured. So I think I'd give it a solid 400 out of 650 for me. Are you higher or lower?
I'm lower than that, I think. Ooh. I enjoyed it. You're right, it's better than The Iron Lady. I think I've rated Election higher.
Yeah, you've rated Election higher than the number I think you're about to say.
If you like conspiracy thrillers, if you like political thrillers, and you want a well-made conspiracy thriller on a weeknight, absolutely worth a watch. Hopefully augmented by the excellent analysis that you've just heard over the past few minutes.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's enjoyable, but I think it takes itself just a little bit too seriously. One of the things I wanted to talk about in the podcast is this idea of kind of the way that these political fictions sort of play out as conspiracy theories. And you could approach this leadership election in a very this house way.
Mm.
You didn't have to do this in a conspiratorial way. You could have focused on the personalities in the centre party. There's about 20 seconds in the film where it starts talking about the different factions in the centre party and about how, oh, well, she is disliked by farmers because of this. And then it's just cut off and no, I want more of that. Give me more. Maybe this is the Labour Party talking about, but like, give me more of that factional
I want
intrigue.
more faction fighting.
I do. I want to know. I want to know what the faction's position is on this, and I want to know why this faction's backing this person, and that person's backing that one, and this person just goes with the wind. And given that it's meant to be quite a small, we only see a dozen basically centre party politicians. You could easily do it in a bit of a 12 Angry Men way, couldn't you? But there's not.
Yeah, that's very true.
But there's not many, and that feels to me again. Well, the way that leadership elections tend to play out in politics are driven by the personalities and driven either by the personality clashes or by the kind of the faction or the ideological clashes. They're not really driven by the sense of conspiracy that this film has.
I fear for how low a score you're about to give it then.
It's still enjoyable though, right? I'm not going to be one of those people that says, "Well, I didn't like the politics of this, so I'm going to mark it." It's very enjoyable, But I gave it 365, which I think is
that's moderate.
yeah.
Theresa May would have been very pleased with that in 2017.
I think Keir Starmer's been very happy with that in 3 years' time. But yeah, so it's a good film. I think it's one that thinks it's making a very serious point about politics and the political class, but that in the end, I think is a bit silly. And equally, I can see why people would think I'm being a bit.
I fear that phrase about thinking you're making a serious point, but actually being silly could be an epitaph for either of our political substacks, couldn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely yes. Far be it from us to be hypocritical, but speaking of Substack, we have so obviously you can subscribe, all the usual channels, but there's a newsletter as well.
Absolutely, we have an email newsletter. There is a link to it in the show notes, so please do sign up to it. You'll get a new email each time we have a new episode out, and we may also slip in a few other little goodies and bonus extras on that. And thank you hugely to everyone who has already subscribed to the podcast in their favourite podcast app, because not only is it good for you, hopefully, because you're getting new episodes appear automatically, but the more people who subscribe, the more likely it is that the podcast algorithm gods will show our podcast to other people and help more people be able to hear us discuss the merits of closing credit sequences on Danish films from 20 years ago.
What we're talking about in 2 weeks' time is a TV show which also features a leadership contest.
And it is the OG of such shows in many ways, because it is Yes Minister. And we will be watching the Party Games episode, where there is a leadership contest that Jem Hacker takes part in. And I mean, I guess it's hard to avoid spoilers, given there was a subsequent TV series titled Yes Prime Minister. So I think we won't need to be as careful about spoilers next time round, but very much looking forward to revisiting one of the all-time political comedy classics.
And if you're in the UK, you can watch that at the moment on iPlayer.
Thank you very much for listening.